The Journey to Self-Awareness. A Buddhist perspective on embracing old age. Waking up to a new reality. Have you ever woken up in the early hours of the morning, staring at the ceiling, feeling an indescribable emptiness? The house is still, the air motionless, yet deep within, a quiet whisper lingers, a subtle but undeniable sense that something has changed. That something has slipped away. You sit up, take a deep breath, and glance around the room. The walls that once echoed with laughter now seem to hold only silence. The familiar rhythm of your days continues, waking up, making tea, gazing out the window at a world that keeps moving forward, but something is different. A profound realization settles in. You have spent your entire life giving, sacrificing, and holding everything together. And now, as the years have passed, you find yourself asking, what remains? Perhaps your children, who once filled your home with noise and energy, have grown and embarked on their own journeys, their lives consumed by responsibilities and ambitions. The friendships you once cherished have faded, scattered like autumn leaves carried away by the wind. Even your career, a role that once defined so much of your purpose, now exists only in memories, a closed chapter in the book of your life. And so, in the quiet moments of solitude, a question emerges, one that you may have avoided, but that now gently insists on being heard. Who am I now, when I am no longer needed the way I once was? But this is not a question of despair. It is not a lament for what has been lost. Instead, it is a moment of awakening, an invitation to rediscover yourself beyond the roles you have played. It is the first step toward understanding that purpose is not something that fades with age, it is something that evolves. Buddhism offers a profound truth. Suffering arises from attachment. Attachment to roles, to relationships, to the belief that life should always give back in equal measure. But just as the river does not mourn the passing of its waters, we too can learn to flow with change, to embrace the shifting tides of existence with grace and wisdom. This moment in your life is not an ending. It is a transformation, a chance to see yourself not through the lens of what you were, but through the limitless possibilities of who you are still becoming. The illusion of permanence. For much of our lives, we carry an unspoken belief, a quiet expectation that the love we give will be returned, that our sacrifices will be acknowledged, that our loyalty and care will create an unbreakable cycle of reciprocity. It's a comforting thought, one that gives meaning to our efforts. But time, as Buddhism teaches, is impermanent. Nothing remains exactly as it was. Think about the relationships you've built over the years, the friends you once saw every weekend, the children who once clung to your hand, the colleagues who once shared in your daily struggles. Over time, those connections change. Some fade naturally, not out of malice, but simply because life moves forward. And yet, when this happens, there is often a lingering pain, a quiet voice inside that asks, did they forget? Do they not care anymore? There is a story of an old man, Mr. Huang, who spent his entire life working tirelessly to provide for his family. He ensured his children had opportunities he never did, sacrificing his own comfort so they could thrive. His love wasn't loud, it was expressed through long nights of hard work, through quiet gestures of selflessness, through the unspoken devotion of a father who asked for nothing in return. But as the years passed, his phone rang less frequently. The family dinners he once hosted became occasional, then rare, then non-existent. He would sit by the window, watching the world outside, realizing that no matter how much he had given, life had moved on without him. This is not a tragic story, it is simply life. Children grow, friendships shift, circumstances change, and yet, many of us hold onto an invisible contract, a belief that if we give enough, if we care enough, if we love enough, we will never be left behind. But Buddhism reminds us of a fundamental truth. Expectation is the root of suffering. When we love with the expectation of return, we unknowingly set ourselves up for pain. We begin to measure relationships and transactions in how much we give versus how much we receive. But what if we let go of this illusion? What if we loved and gave, not to ensure a future return, but simply because kindness is its own reward? Imagine planting a tree, not because you demand its shade, but simply because it is good to plant trees. Imagine offering kindness, not because you expect it back, but because kindness itself is a beautiful way to exist. When we learn to give without attachment, our hearts remain light, But when we cling to the idea that people should reciprocate in a certain way, we burden ourselves with disappointment. Life is always changing, always shifting, always moving forward. And perhaps the greatest wisdom we can embrace is this: to love freely, to give generously, and to release our grip on the illusion that anything was ever meant to stay the same. Reclaiming the energy once given. So, how do we navigate this inevitable shift in life without falling into loneliness or resentment? How do we move forward when the roles we once played, caregiver, provider, nurturer, are no longer needed in the same way? The answer is both simple and profound. Stop seeking validation from the outside world and turn inward. Reclaim the energy that you have so freely given away for so long. Think about it. You have spent your entire life prioritizing others, the needs of your family, the demands of your career, the expectations of society. You have poured your energy into being what others needed you to be. But now, as you step into this new chapter of life, it is time to pause and ask yourself, what brings me joy? What have I long neglected? What is still possible for me in this life? The story of Mr. Anand, a life reclaimed. There is a beautiful story of a retired businessman named Mr. Anand. For decades, he chased success, believing that money, recognition, and social status would bring fulfillment. He worked tirelessly, often sacrificing time with his loved ones, convinced that his efforts would one day be rewarded with deep satisfaction. But as he aged, something shifted. He realized that all the accolades and wealth, all the respect he had earned in the business world, meant little in the grand scheme of things. His achievements were admired by many, yet he felt strangely empty inside. He had spent so much time proving himself to others that he had never truly lived for himself. Then, one day, he made a bold decision. He walked away from the pressures of his old life and moved to a quiet village. There, he embraced a different rhythm of existence. He spent his days painting, reading, tending to a small garden, and simply enjoying the quiet moments of life. And in that stillness, he discovered a kind of peace he had never known before. For the first time, he was not living for others, he was living for himself. The art of reclaiming yourself. This is not about isolation. It is not about rejecting the people or experiences that shaped you. It is about rediscovering yourself. It is about embracing solitude not as loneliness, but as an opportunity for self-connection. Too often, we associate self-care with selfishness, as though prioritizing our own happiness takes something away from others. But in truth, nurturing yourself is the key to genuine contentment. When you stop looking outward for fulfillment, when you stop measuring your worth by how much you do for others, you begin to see that happiness has been within you all along. Take a moment to reflect. Have you always wanted to learn an instrument, but never had the time? Now is your chance. Have you dreamed of traveling but always put it off for responsibilities? The world is still waiting. Have you longed to reconnect with an old passion, writing, gardening, painting, music? It's not too late. When you shift your focus from what you have lost to what you still can do, life opens up in unexpected ways. Buddhism teaches that attachment leads to suffering, but letting go does not mean losing love. It means freeing yourself from the burden of expectation. It means embracing the present moment as it is, not as you wish it to be. So, as you stand at this crossroad, remember this: your worth is not determined by how much you give to others, but by how deeply you nurture your own soul. This is your time. Reclaim it. The power of silence and letting go. When we are young, we often feel the need to be heard. We want to explain, to defend, to prove our worth. We argue our points, demand recognition, and struggle to ensure that our voice carries weight. But as we grow older, something shifts. We begin to realize that not every battle is worth fighting. Not every argument needs a response. And not every opinion requires our validation. Buddhism teaches the principle of right speech, to speak only when words are truthful, necessary, and kind. But silence, too, is a language of wisdom. The lesson of the silent monk. There is a story of an elderly monk who was once a celebrated scholar. His reputation for deep wisdom attracted many students, including a young man who was eager to impress him. The student approached the monk with a series of complex philosophical arguments, speaking quickly and passionately, hoping to spark a debate. The monk simply listened. He did not interrupt, nor did he react. When the student finally paused, expecting a challenge or a counter-argument. The monk smiled gently and said, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts." Then he walked away. The student was left speechless. He had expected resistance, an intellectual duel, an opportunity to prove himself. Instead, he was met with silence, a response that was more powerful than any argument. At first, the student was frustrated, but as he reflected, he understood. The monk had nothing to prove. He had no need to engage in unnecessary debates, no desire to validate his wisdom through words. His silence was not indifference, it was mastery. Silence is strength, not weakness. We live in a world that constantly demands reaction. Social media, news, conversations, all seem to pressure us into having an opinion on everything. But wisdom is knowing when to speak and when to remain still. In your later years, you no longer need to explain yourself to everyone. You do not need to seek approval, to justify your choices, or to fight for a place in conversations where your presence is not valued. You have already lived, already learned. Your wisdom does not require an audience to be real. Think about the times in your life when silence would have served you better than words. A heated argument that drained your energy but changed nothing. A moment when someone misunderstood you, and no amount of explaining would have changed their mind. A time when someone criticized you unfairly, and your response only gave them more power over your emotions. In each of these moments, silence could have been your greatest ally. The freedom of letting go. Letting go is not about surrendering. It is about choosing peace over proving a point. It is about realizing that you do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. When you stop feeling the need to correct, defend, or seek approval, you free yourself from unnecessary burdens. You conserve your energy for things that truly matter: inner peace, joy, and meaningful connections. There is an old Zen proverb that says, "Let go, or be dragged." When we hold on to resentment, when we insist on being right, when we cling to the illusion that we must always be understood, we suffer. But when we learn to let go, we gain something far more valuable: peace of mind. So, as you walk forward in life, remember this: silence is not emptiness, it is wisdom. Let go of the need to always be heard, and you will find that your presence speaks louder than words ever could. Letting go of the need for approval. One of the greatest sources of suffering is the relentless need to be validated by others. From childhood, we are conditioned to seek approval, to be praised for our achievements, to be accepted, to be recognized. We learn early that a kind word from a teacher, a nod of approval from a parent, or applause from an audience feels good. It reassures us that we are worthy. But as life progresses, we must stop and ask ourselves, why am I still trying to prove myself? Whose approval am I truly seeking? And at what cost? The story of Lila, a life lived for others. There is a story of a woman named Lila, who spent most of her life chasing validation. As a daughter, she worked tirelessly to make her parents proud. She chose a career they approved of, even though it wasn't what she truly loved. As a wife, she sacrificed her own dreams, always putting her husband's ambitions before her own. As a mother, she poured everything into her children, neglecting her own happiness, believing that her worth was measured by how much she gave. Decades passed. Her children grew up and started their own lives. Her husband became absorbed in his own world. Her parents, long gone, could no longer witness her achievements. And suddenly, she was left with a quiet realization. She had never truly lived for herself. Then, one day, she made a decision. She let go. She stopped chasing validation. She stopped trying to fit into molds that no longer served her. She started doing things simply because they made her happy. She took up painting, even though no one would call her an artist. She traveled to places she had always dreamed of, even if she had to go alone. She spoke her mind without fear of judgment. And in doing so, she found something she had been missing all her life: freedom. The liberation of self-acceptance. Buddhism teaches that true happiness arises not from being understood or praised by others, but from understanding oneself. When we depend on external approval, we hand over control of our happiness. We become like puppets, reacting to praise and criticism, forever dancing to the tune of what others think. But what if you stopped seeking approval? What if you wore what you loved, even if it wasn't in style? What if you pursued your passions, even if no one else understood them? What if you spoke your truth, even if it wasn't what people wanted to hear? Imagine how much lighter life would feel. Imagine how much joy you would reclaim. The illusion of approval. The truth is, no matter what you do, there will always be someone who disapproves. You could spend your whole life trying to please people, and still, there will be critics. But does their opinion define you? When you stop seeking validation, you gain something much more valuable. Authenticity, inner peace, the courage to be yourself. Letting go of the need for approval is not about rejecting love or relationships. It is about understanding that your worth is not something that others decide. It is something you recognize within yourself. So, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what would I do differently if I no longer needed approval? Then go do it, because your life is yours to live, not theirs to judge. Conclusion. Choosing yourself. The greatest act of self-respect is realizing that your well-being is not a luxury, it is a necessity. For too long, you have given your time, your energy, and your love freely. You have sacrificed, compromised, and shaped yourself to fit the needs and expectations of others, your family, your work, your society. You have been the caretaker, the provider, the one who held everything together. But now, as you stand at this new crossroads in life, it is time to ask, what about me? What do I need? Who am I when I am no longer defined by what I do for others? This chapter is yours, not because you are abandoning the people you love, but because you are finally including yourself in the love you give. The freedom of letting go. Happiness is not something that will be handed to you. No one will come and tell you that now. At last, it is your turn to live. If you keep waiting for permission to prioritize yourself, you will wait forever. So make a choice, a bold, beautiful, liberating choice. Let go of resentment. You cannot change the past, but you can free yourself from carrying it. Release expectations. People may not always show up in the way you hoped, but that does not have to dictate your happiness. Choose yourself, not out of defiance, not out of selfishness, but out of love. You deserve peace. You deserve joy. You deserve to wake up each day feeling whole, not because of what you do for others, but simply because you exist. Step forward with grace. So take a deep breath. Feel the weight of old expectations lift off your shoulders. Step forward with grace, knowing that you are not leaving anything behind. You're simply embracing what was always meant to be yours. And remember, your happiness is not up for debate. It does not require approval. It does not need validation. It is yours to create. Claim it.